Welcome to another episode of Catalyzing Radical Systemic Change, where it's all about discovering, mapping, and cross-pollinating what I think are the crucial building blocks towards a planetary civilization ahead. And I know that this specific person that I will introduce in a bit agrees with me that the transition towards a planetary civilization is not only necessary, it's possible. But we need some very specific ingredients for that. And I'm convinced that co-creation, there's something within that which is more than just a buzzword. As we know, our culture appropriates basically anything it can get its hands on. And I think one of the most abused buzzwords, besides maybe sustainability in the last years, has been co-creation. So what is actually co-creation, and why do we think it's of tantamount importance for the challenges we face as humanity from a local, let's say community level, to a meso level, let's say a city planning level, to a transnational or global level, such as global governance and how we tackle climate change. So it's my great pleasure to be in that virtual room together today with Jascha Rohr. Jascha Rohr is not only a colleague, I would really call him one of my closest friends. And before I lead over to you, Jascha, and we dive into the nitty-gritty of co-creation and best practice examples and citizens' assemblies and city planning and global governance, I'm really curious how this specific, let's say, word and cultural change technique of co-creation showed up in your biography. And this is a pretty usual thing, how I lead over into the topics, really showing like the who is in this virtual room with me together. So it's a great pleasure to be with you, Jascha. And the first question would be, out of your biography, what are the couple of pivotal moments that connect you with co-creation? The word's on your side.
Okay, thanks a lot, Alistair. And the pleasure is on my side, and I'm really, really happy to connect with you this way over all the time zones. It's great seeing you in the, looks like a jungle. I'm in Vienna at the Vienna Design Week here, where I had a keynote talk, and yeah, it's great to talk with you about co-creation. And I know we have had many kind of conversations on it, so I'm looking forward to this podcast. Concerning your question and my biography and where I came across co-creation, it was a pretty late development, I would say, that what I am doing, that I called that co-creation, but it made sense from where I was coming from. And where I was coming from was that when I sort of became aware of political issues when I was 14, 15, 16 years old, I think the first thing which really struck me was the rise of global population and the exponential growth of global population. That was something which really struggled and puzzled me as a young person growing up in Germany, being somehow connected to the environmental movement, demonstrating against nuclear waste and so forth. That were the issues of my time. And I read the Greenpeace magazine, and I always came across like the exponential growth curves, and especially to world population. And I was puzzled because I thought, you know, how can we stop this movement? How can we deal with the ever faster and faster growing population on Earth? And so from that developed my interest in environmental policy and activism, and also in the question. I'm a philosopher, so my basic question was how is it possible that we as the human species are more or less the only species on the planet who can destroy the fundaments of their livelihoods? So that is the basic continue of my political agenda basically since then. And the first solutions I came across, or the first idea that there is a possibility to do something against it, to achieve sustainability on a global level, was when I came into contact as a student in London with the permaculture movement. And it immediately struck me that I have to learn not permaculture as a sort of growing technique for food, but that I have to learn permaculture as a design approach, because that was what I understood it really is fundamentally. If you go to the founders like David Holmgren, Bill Mollison, it was always about design. And that was the first thing that I understood. Okay, there's something we as human beings can do, design, creating things, looking for solutions to make things better, even maybe sustainable. So permaculture design, and especially the design aspect, became really important. And then as a young adult, I founded with my partner together, Sonja Hörster, the Institute for Participatory Design, because we had the notion that sustainability design or environmental design is good, but if it's only done by expert, it's not sufficient, because the people who actually live in the newly designed environments, sustainable environments, they have to be empowered to design for their communities and their livelihoods and their own places themselves. It can't rely on some experts who are able to do these kind of sustainability design and move on, and the people are left with it. So I came across participation as a very fundamental step to do this design. So if we want to design sustainability, my notion was we have to involve everyone in the design process. And that basically are already the two ingredients which still, to me nowadays, focus on or are included in what I now call co-creation, because co for me means just together, basically. And in my understanding, I have a background as a philosopher in eco-psychology and deep ecology and so on. For me, this together, the co doesn't mean humans together, but the whole world, the human and the non-human world, have to co-create, and creation as a kind of conscious design process, which we can embrace and learn, and have to actually learn as a way of dealing with the issues we face in this world. So in the last years, when I look back at the sustainability issues and the state of the world we're in at the moment as a global civilization, I thought, okay, my understanding and my experience of how participation works and how design works, I put that together. And I frame it as I would now say deep co-creation, because there's also a kind of low or shallow co-creation, which is just sort of there's also marketing approaches which are called co-creation, which is basically a sort of focus groups or something, with a little bit of creativity techniques. That's not my understanding of co-creation. My understanding of co-creation is deep processes of design together with what I call all participators of a given field or context environment.
I think I need to laugh a little bit, because preparing for the podcast and writing the outline, I became aware we almost know each other for 20 years. And since this is really a very complex topic, I'm actually very grateful that I know quite a bit what you're doing. So just as a preface for the listeners, this will be a wild ride from a micro, meso to macro level, unpacking the toolboxes and giving best practice examples. I wonder though, Jascha, since at least towards the very end, we aim also to dive into global co-creation. So I think it's a good moment in the podcast to really sketch or unpack the word co-creation itself. And then what do you mean with it? And in what context did you also write your book? I think that's really important to set the tone for the whole conversation.
Yeah, you want me to talk about the book or the concept of co-creation?
I think more you have written the book through various lenses. And ultimately, I know you're working with processes, with very concrete clients from a micro to a meso to a macro level. So I think we can only unpack that for the listeners when you sketch, first of all, maybe how your way of understanding co-creation differs from maybe other people in the field.
Well, I think I've touched upon the main points for me already, which is one is co-creation. The term creation for me has something to do with conscious design, because I hear a lot of people talking about co-creation, and it's just, as you introduced the term, it's just the term for people doing something together, even just talking, and by some magic things will happen, and that then is co-creation. And that's not at all my understanding of co-creation. I'm also a music instrument maker, so I'm a craftsperson, and for me design is a craft. And I speak of the process of design as a designer, an architect, a permaculture designer, uses its craft as well. So co-creation, the creation bit, means really putting our tools and methodologies to work in a craft to consciously design systems, complex systems, governance systems, social systems, ecological systems, from a different attitude, in a sense that this is for me, co-creation is not an instrumental design approach, but it's sort of organic generative design approach. Maybe we come to that later. So, but that's the first important thing. It is design. It's not just talking, doing things together. It is design as a craft, in my understanding, with the tools and methodologies in place. Then the second thing, which I already mentioned as well, is the co as understanding the world as a non-dualistic field in which all elements, human and non-human elements, co-create, which come together. And we can, as designers using this craft, we can use our methodologies and tools to include not just humans into the process, but the whole environment, ecosystems, animals, plants, even stories, abstract concepts, technology. They are all what I would call participators in the process. And if we think about co-creative design processes, we have to include all of them in these processes as well. So that's the second thing. And there is a third thing, but I've forgotten about it.
Oh, good. I think this will become more obvious when we sketch a couple of examples.
Absolutely.
Before we go ultimately on this like planetary or global level, how about you literally just sketch one specific example? I don't mind really which one, maybe one that you're currently working on, or one that was particularly successful. Maybe it also makes sense to sketch one that has like oddly failed, to explain why you think that especially this focus of including in the process design the human, but as well as the non-human actors, is so important in this like field process model of yours.
Well, let me talk about something which is about to start doing. Maybe that's interesting as well, because We can then have a sort of second podcast later on and see if it worked or not. We're just this weekend we will start with the Citizens Assembly for the German Parliament on food systems and what's it called? I'm lacking the word. You have to help me. Ernährung. You can cut that out.
Just food security, maybe.
Yeah, it's not just food security. It's about how we eat, how we get the food on the table, and there are 160 citizens. They come to this process by lottery, and they deliberate on how in Germany the government should deal with food, basically, how society deals with food. And the Citizens Assembly are formats where people come together and talk. And this, in my understanding, is not co-creation, but I'm trying to build co-creative methodology into it. So we have a deliberative format where people come together and debate and discuss political issues. And I'm trying to build into that co-creative methodologies, which means we have in our process work, we will have excursions and some experiences outside on the field, for example, in the supermarket. We will co-create vision boards where we build actually the future, how we imagine it, and then derive from that our arguments and interpretations of what politics can do with this or not. And this is a way how I want to create opportunities for the people in the citizens' assemblies to get out of their head and only talking, and also into experiencing everything which has to do with food, and getting some embodiment practice and emotional practices and so on and so forth, and really trying to understand that food itself and the way how food is produced in Germany plays a role in the process of how we want to create our future.
I would like to stay with that example, actually, Jascha. So, and I know you need to somehow wear also, let's say, an official hat, you know, since these are also client relationships. But when we look at like how normally democracy is done, right? Like once every 4 years, we cast a ballot, we vote for a certain party, and maybe in some democracies we have a direct vote for the president, which is not, you know, the fact in Germany. But when I think of this example of a citizens' assembly, which is a deliberative format where people usually talk, and you try to, let's say, inject some co-creative DNA that enriches the depth of the process. When we think a little bit further into the future, how may such co-creative process designs play a role in some democracies on the planet, so that we make sure that more of the, let's say, collective wisdom, collective genius, collective intelligence of the citizens themselves becomes part of the political process itself? I'm really curious to dive a little bit deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are two levels to it. And one level is the format itself. The citizen assembly can over time become more co-creative, can shift from deliberative discussions to co-creative design. So that in the end, we have assemblies where people come together not to talk, but to design their future. That is my vision, or part of my vision, that democracies have these formats institutionalized. At the moment, it is just sort of an experiment. We'll do it once, twice, and if it works, we'll probably do it more often, but it's not sort of written down in our constitution that we have these citizens' assemblies, nor that we have what I would rather call it a co-creative third chamber. Like Germany has two chambers. We have the Bundestag and the Bundesrat, so it's a parliament and a second chamber. And I think it would be great to have institutionalized in the constitution a third chamber where citizens come together to co-create solutions for their future. Not deliberate on them, but really co-create them in a way that they draft projects, that they draft legislation, that they think about measures and certain projects which can then be introduced and implemented by the government. So that was my ideal. And there's a second layer to it. And just let me get to that as well, because I know you're interested in that field as well. Doing this kind of work and working on these formats and these experiments at the moment, like citizens' assemblies, even if they're deliberate formats, or future co-creative formats which are institutionalized in a constitution, it is itself a co-creation in the realm of governance design. So what we are actually doing is we are trying to change the DNA of our democracies. We are trying to update the democracies. We're doing a design for future democracies by introducing and experimenting with these kind of formats. And that itself is, in a way, a co-creative design process on the system of our democracies. And now we can look into many political systems in the world and ask ourselves the questions like, how can we update them as a conscious design practice without, having to either fall into, we have to live with it as it is, or we have to have a bloody revolution. Like the question really is, from my understanding, how can we have a co-creative evolution of democracies in the world? And that itself is a co-creative process.
Just trying to summarize, loop back, because we're in a pretty complex endeavor here to unpack what you have said. In my understanding, co-creation as a process, as applied to, in this example, how democracy is institutionalized in Germany, could mean that we enrich the capacity of meaning making, sense making, of co-creative processes with the citizens themselves, which is only done in an experimental stage, but in the years to come, it may grow into a more institutionalized form, which you were sketching as a possible third chamber, where experts, citizens, politicians, the economy, civil society, think tanks, and so forth come together to innovate on how democracy is done in Germany. Did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know in Germany, for example, you might have heard about the climate activists, last generation, they're called, and they're everywhere in the world, or Extinction Rebellion. And I know they are thinking about these kinds of as I would call governance design or democratic update ideas as well, because they know that for something like climate change, the democratic systems as they exist today are just too slow and incapable of really getting sort of the design done, the social design or the political design done to really tackle the questions of climate change. So they are also focusing on, beyond activism, what can we do? Can we change our political system in a peaceful way towards an update so that our political systems will be much better able to tackle, for example, climate change faster, more efficient, more innovative?
I wonder, Jascha, besides that, so for whatever reason, we started with this like already pretty big picture, whole nation state, redesigning, governance structures, participatory processes on the level of a modern democracy such as Germany. I wonder, is there another example that you can sketch on a different level of aggregate, maybe a city level, a city planning level, where you have already implemented some work and where you see also some fruition, maybe a change in how administration is done, where people are taking some of the elements of co-creation into tackling complex issues?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a couple of years back in the past, but one of my just favorite processes, because it just turned out beautifully over the course of a whole year, was in Frankfurt, huge city in Germany. And we had a co-creative process on how to update and innovate the schooling system for the whole city. Like, I don't know how many, 60,000 pupils or something, or even 160,000 pupils. I'm not quite sure anymore, but Frankfurt at that time was in a state that they had to build 2 new elementary schools every year just to have sufficient schools for the pupils of the city. And the building process would take 6 to 8 years to just build one of these schools. And so it was absolutely impossible to find a solution under the paradigms and under the administrative systems at that time. So what we did, or from the political field, like the minister or of education of the city, she actually said, you know, I'll take another year, even though we're under pressure. I take another year and I will work on solutions with everyone in the city being involved in education. Pupils, teachers, parents, organizations who are into education, the Ministry of Education, and so on and so forth. The whole year we'll do a co-creative process and tackle these solutions. And we were really able to work co-creatively. So we made designs for the actual measures and projects to be implemented in the city. And we did that, and it was very successful. Like the parliament of the city voted for it anonymously, because like from every party, people were involved in the process. The ministry, they sort of checked the whole concept for education of the city, because they were involved in the process. Everyone was involved, so everyone was really keen on bringing the thing on tracks. That was nice to see. There was no resistance whatsoever, because all resistance was already articulated in the process and was dealt with. So at the end, we had a concept where there was no resistance anymore. And the most astonishing thing for me was the paradigm shift, because somewhere along the process, and this is what I feel always happens if you really go into these processes of co-creation, there happens what I call a crisis, and a crisis is always sort of an element for transformation. So people realized that all the ideas they had for the future school system of Frankfurt couldn't be implemented as long as the government and administrative system of the city worked in the way it was working at that time. So they started to also draft, there comes governance design again into play. They also drafted a new structure, how the administration should deal with the organization of the whole education process in the city, which was shifting away from having chapters in the administration focused on school forms like elementary school and higher education and so forth for the whole city. Like they had one what's it called, one chapter or Abteilung for each of it. And they understood that they have to think in terms of city quarters, so that they have one person or a team in the administration for every city quarter, which would then manage and administer a complex local system of all these schools and associations and education offers from private persons and so on, together as an ecosystem. And they started to think about education as sort of local education ecosystems in the city quarters, where the pupils would actually sort of live through these ecosystems over time of 14, 16 years. And that changed the whole focus of how they thought about education in Frankfurt. And they actually did it. So they restructured the organizational hierarchy in the school administration or the administration for education to make the other project and measures of the design possible. And this is what I'm really looking for if I'm talking about these co-creative processes, that these kind of transformational paradigm shifts happen.
So I feel now it's a good moment to intersect the two examples that I heard. So let's say on the nation state level and on one of the biggest cities in Germany. So it's called Frankfurt am Main. So for those listening in and that don't know Germany, there's two Frankfurts in Germany. So we're talking about Frankfurt am Main, which is still the main financial hub in Germany and has more than a million inhabitants. I wonder, Jascha, because I reckon at least some of the people listening to have catch in the very beginning that you want to include in your process design. And I know there are some, they're not trademarked, they're kind of open source-ish pieces. In your field process design, you also put a strong emphasis on the non-human actors. And I wonder, just to intersect your theory with the practice and how you build these processes, can you sketch a process very hands-on, I don't mind on which level, where especially taking into account the non-human actors in the field process design made a huge impact?
Let's stay with Frankfurt, because we really introduced all these, like, I truly believe that the whole ecosystem idea, which came from the participants of the process, was due to the fact that we in the process design included the whole city as such in our process design. And we did it in various ways. So this is not some esoteric thing to include non-human elements in a process. It is pretty mundane, I would even say. It just means that sitting down, organizing a process, I think always, what do the participants, like human participants, need in order to move from one step to the other so that they can do a design on the subject at hand. And I do the same for the non-human participants. So I ask myself the question, for example, what role plays the city itself, the city quarters, the school buildings, and so forth, in the process of finding solutions? And how can I include their agency in the design process? And it is very, very simple. It's not magic at all, but it's important to do it anyways. It is, for example, we did all our meetings and all the events took place in the city quarters, in the school buildings, like, so, and we always put in some elements where the participants would explore the building, look what's working, what's not working, talking to the pupils, going out in the park, to the sports ground. So really connecting not only as humans, human participants, Like if you do an introductory session, for example, like every workshop has an introductory session, I always care for having an introductory session between the human participants and the non-human participants, which often is just a walk around and just, you know, experience the place and connect to the place and understand what the problems, the needs, and also the potentiality of a place is, or thing, for example. So using the things in the school for our process was another issue, how we did it. Like we didn't bring sort of new fancy workshop stuff in there. We worked with the same materials the pupils have to work in the schools. And that was pretty old stuff because it was underfinanced and not sort of state of the art. So that makes an impact for everyone. So I just let the agency of the things and buildings and places speak for themselves, so to speak, in a process. And that's all.
I wonder, out of your rich toolbox, I really know that in the friendship and soul companionship we built over the last almost 20 years, I had a couple of big aha moments with the field process model. So I wonder, people, most of them will listen. So I think it's either it's easier to exemplify or sketch a story, because there's certain assumptions within these field process model that I think differ quite a bit, and show the people the ontological, to use the word ontological, backdrop of why you build all these processes from a non-dual and non-linear perspective. So curious, how you want to sketch the field process model.
Well, I don't know if the field process model explains the non-duality. I would say the non-duality and the sort of integral worldview or paradigm, it's an inner attitude I apply towards everything I do. The field process model for me is a very simple, well, a model is always a simplified version of what is there out there in reality, and it never does match reality, but it's a map to navigate reality, or whatever you want to call it if you don't want to use the word reality. And it is more about qualities of process. And in my understanding, and it actually comes back to permaculture again. So our field process model is what Bill Mollison already sketched out as the core model in permaculture. And it is a way how to understand natural patterns in terms of how to deploy them for design practices. How can we learn from natural patterns in our design practice? And I took this model and I took it out from, building design solutions for natural environments to how to work with this model, with these patterns of processes in our design processes and co-creation on a social and political basis. And basically you can think about a tree. And there's sort of the root system, and this is where I always think I like to start my processes. But of course, the tree has all the qualities at once, and that's important to note on this model. But let's think about a tree going through the 4 seasons of climate here in Germany. And there's the root system, and the roots just draw everything in. And so in the first quality in a process is, for me, what I call emergence, not emergence, but emergence. Emergere means to dive in, or resonance. So we go into resonance, we make connections, we combine, we handshake with other people and non-human beings, and create a field where we feel that there is a common understanding of what the whole process is about. And if this understanding happens, my experience in these processes is that with understanding comes a kind of, it's overwhelming. Like there's so much information, there's so much connection, so much problems, so many problems pop up and questions are raised that we're overwhelmed and we stumble into crisis. Crisis for me is just a quality of not being, of having no orientation anymore, of being lost. It's a black hole. We can't see through it. We have no orientation. We don't know where to go, what to decide. That is crisis. And that is, I think, also the quality of the whole process, the global process we are in at the moment, for example, with climate change. And the transformation only comes from if in that moment of crisis, like we're deep in the black, cavern of, I don't know, Luke Skywalker going down in the cavern and facing his mirror image, or Gandalf walking through Moria and fighting with Balrog, or Joseph walking with his crew through the desert. So these are all moments of crisis and of transformation. And we make a decision. And then suddenly with the decision in Frankfurt, the decision was to change the administrative system completely to match the problems we're facing. That was the transformative moment in the crisis of, oh, fuck, we have all these good ideas, but they will never work as long as the administration works the old way. So the transformational point was we have to change the sort of the governance, and then suddenly new possibilities open up, and that's the quality of of co-creation. That is where we become innovative, playful again. We see new options, new opportunities, and it's a creative process with a lot of fun. And that's also the quality in the process, but it only comes after we've stepped through this crisis and moment of transformation. And then we start to implement, and what we get is, so we are now in the branches. So I forgot to mention the tree. So we have the roots, is the resonance, the crisis is the sort of the stem in the middle, where we transform the nutrients which come from the roots. The co-creation is like the branches with all the fruits and flowers and all these new abundance coming up, and then things fall back down in autumn in Germany, back down to the soil. And that is the quality of cultivation or harvesting, where we have often for a long time a stable system. For example, civilization. If it's stable, it is in the phase of cultivation. If it starts to collapse, we'll have to get into resonance with what is again. Then we have to go into crisis, make a decision. Where do we want to go with our civilization? If we do this decision, we bring ourselves to the point that we can start co-creating new solutions for the new paradigm, for the new orientation, the new path we want to go. And at some point, all these new ideas will sort of crystallize into a new stable civilization, which will probably hold over quite some time, and then will, at some later time, maybe collapse again. So that's the idea of the field process model.
So like the metaphor of this, like first rooting, resonance, getting in contact with the soil, which are all the human and non-human actors, then this metaphor of a stem that pulls in all the nutrients, but most likely, inevitably, in most of these processes, there's also a point of crisis. And if we move through that, there comes a point of flourishing, flowering, ultimately the fruits on the tree taking shape, a new state of abundance and creativity. And then the leaves fall again down and become nutrients for a new cycle. I wonder, Jascha, because I know you as a human being pretty well, and you're now working in this field for 25 years, and you've done hundreds of projects, you have had hundreds of clients. What are the big challenges and obstacles in the different arenas from the people participating, but also from the clients, that usually don't lead to that, let's say, point of flourishing beyond or after this crisis moment?
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, if we look at it from the field process model, as we just talked about it, there's one very critical point, and that is what I would call in Germany is the Schwelle. I don't know, what is it? The threshold. Threshold. Yeah, of course, the threshold. So before there is a decision to enter into crisis, before we actually are in crisis and have to make the transformative decision, we'll have to walk over the threshold into the cave, so to speak. And this is a point where most people back off because they're afraid, rightly so, because it's not nice being in that cave, you know, it's uncomfortable, but it's the only way to transform. So what happens quite a lot is you move towards the threshold of this crisis and people get tense and start feeling the tension and the crisis coming up, and they shy away, they get afraid, they turn back, and then they cycle sort of in this really toxic spot just in front of the threshold without ever crossing it. And often very strong systems, like, for example, administrative systems, actually encourage to stay in this cycle rather than moving over the threshold. They give sort of incentives for those who stay with what is rather than taking the risk of getting into crisis. And that is really the main problem. And a problem also I very often can't fix because it's not part of my briefing, so to speak. People come to me and say, yeah, even administrations come to me and say, let's do this great project, and we're really ambitious and we want to do all these amazing things, and we have a lot of pressure, it needs to be done fast, and we will want to include everyone. And I draft this process and we start it, and then we come close to where it really hurts, where we really have to look at some pain points and so on and so forth. And suddenly my own the people who gave me actually the briefing and said, you know, Jascha, do this for us, they shy away and say, stop, we can't do that. We can't push the citizens, the participants into this kind of thing. Can you tone it down? Can you make something nice? Can you build back harmony between everyone? Because we don't want to look at that. And since they pay me, I often have no chance then to say, you know, then I have to leave this project, or I find a way to at least do a little bit of what I think needs to be done. But this is really a problem. And we all know that. I mean, this is a fundamental, almost, I don't like to talk about laws of the process, but it's a fundamental principle of every process, and we know it, you know. Even in a creative process, if you write a book, if you paint a picture, if you make music, if you write a thesis, you always know there comes this point where it gets really uncomfortable, and then you have to make the decision, do I step into the uncomfortable or do I stay where I am? And only if you step into the uncomfortable, then transformation is possible. And otherwise, you'll probably create a result, but no one will really feel any energy in it. It doesn't have the sort of the aliveness which comes from the solutions which go through one of these transformative paradigm shifting processes. And that's, I think, really the main challenge.
Yeah, I mean, we're also none of us, like at least not me, not you, you know, are pretending to be the Wizard of Oz, and you know, we have it figured out, and suddenly through some process design from Jascha Rohr, we can solve all the problems. One thing that
let me just maybe say one thing, because that was a little bit pessimistic, and that brings maybe some hope. Like, the more often you step over the threshold, you can train that. For example, after all these 20 years of doing that, I get excited when I see the threshold coming closer, because I know now is the point, and I like pushing people over it in a gentle form and a consensual form, pushing them over the threshold, because I know now it gets really fun, you know, now the adventure really starts. So what I want to say is, I think we really need to create for ourselves and for others opportunities to experience what happens if you actually step over the threshold, face your crisis, get into a transformation, and from there move to these really joyful, abundant phase of co-creation. And we have to create these experiences, because mostly people are afraid, because what they have trained is never to step over the threshold. And we have to break that cycle.
Yeah, so maybe then the main ingredient is less a wizard and more a shaman or an alchemist who incentivizes people to really train their faculty, their capability to get more excited when things get messy, and to step into the unknown so that something really unforeseen can emerge. Jascha, I still have a couple of really important topics that I want to run through with you. So if I put an individual and the community within a process on a spectrum. So on the one hand would be like a process design that focuses a lot on the individual, and another one that focuses more on the, let's say, culture, we space. I wonder, how do you tackle that tension? If that's different in different process designs, what do you do if some few people try to sabotage a whole process? Let's stay with these two examples. Doesn't matter if on a, let's say, city level, getting innovative in the education segment, or really innovate on a whole nation state. How do you tackle the tension between individuals and the group processes within a co-creative process?
I'm trying to get your two questions together. Like, you're asking me what my understanding is of working with the individual and the collective basis, or how certain individual can sort of crash and...
I think it's a little bit of the two. So I've been part of co-creative processes, but not designing them. So I wonder, you have 160 individuals on that nation state level, and what happens if you, as the facilitator, the guy building the process design, but also having a facilitation or co-facilitation or head facilitation role, what do you do if some people try to sabotage the process? That's basically question number one. The other one comes more from a process design point of view. How do you tackle the tension in between, let's say, healthy individuals, giving them space, and a certain amount where you need to allocate a focus on the group level within the process design?
Those are many, many questions, and they are quite tough. Okay, let me try. First of all, if someone wants to sabotage it from the inside, that is not a problem. Because if you are a good process facilitator, all you do is make this transparent. And usually, if you have a kind of already established a culture of co-creation and some kind of habits, the participants will do that themselves. Like, So one of the questions you just raised is, and what's the agenda behind it? What you just did. And then people start to fantasize and to project, and we start talking about it, and we plot it down on a whiteboard and say, look, you know, what is it actually you want to achieve with this kind of action here? So you go into the process. That is not really a difficult thing, I think. Again, here, the worst you can do is not addressing it. You know, there are many moderators and facilitators who think if someone comes with a really toxic or behavior or wants to crash a process, they have to kind of shut this person off out of the process. That's exactly the wrong thing. You just have to take it in, work with it, make everything bloody transparent, and it'll work. So that's at least my understanding. Then there are those who try to sabotage from the outside. That is much more difficult because you can't work with them. And actually, when Sonja and I started with this kind of work, we tried to somehow convince them, invite them, whatever. We're not doing that anymore. We just found out this backfires completely, and it takes a lot of resources and energy from our side. So the only idea I have, and I also write in the book about it a little bit, is, and I know this is not a fix-all solution, but it's the only idea I have at the moment. And if any one of the listeners come up with a better idea, I'm happy to hear it. It is create as much abundance, joy, agency, and fun in the process as possible. Make it warm, welcoming, connecting, and so on, so that these people from the outside become envious of not being part of it, so that they are drawn and attracted into your process. That's the only idea I have at the moment. Just make the better offer. You know, like, you can stay in your misery and toxic, you know, antagonistic behavior, or you can just join the fun and get some results, you know, along your own interests, because this is the place where we deal with it, and make this obvious to everyone. That's the only thing you can do, as far as I'm concerned. So, and then there's a third dimension, and this for me at the moment is sort of a field where I try to really work my head around how to communicate that, because this is, I feel, also a non-dualism paradigm shift, which we all need to kind of embrace, or I think it would be helpful if we would all embrace it. Like, we are talking about individuals, groups in the world, let's say, or I'd call it people, our projects where we are in teams, and the global issues. And we think those are three separate realms. Like, I do yoga and meditation practice, and I have my personal development goals and inner development goals. That's the one thing. And I do that for me, and I have my own programs and methods, and I have time with that. And then I have the same with my groups and my society, or my teams and my projects, where we have goals, how to achieve that, how to develop the project, and so on and so forth. And we have the same for our global world. Like, we have the sustainable development goals, for example, and so on and so forth. And we also think this is three different separate things. And I learned that from Max Schuppach, for example, and other people from process work, Anna and Dell, that actually this is not true. We are connected, and these issues are connected, and it's rather three overlapping realms of personal projects or communities and the globe. And the sweet spot to be in a process is where the three resonance lines meet. Like if you work on some issue in your project, it is probably also an issue in yourself, and it is probably also a global issue. And if you find a way to see the issue as the thing you have to work on, it'll have an impact on your personal development, on your project development, and your global development. And this is where I try to aim at in a co-creative process. I try to find the sweet spot where I feel if we go into this transformation we've been talking about, we transform ourselves, we transform the project, and we transform at least aspects of our global eco-society.
I wonder from the podcast so far, I have the feeling we're now pretty much in the climax. At least I'm super interested, less to try to look into a crystal ball, but when you look at all the co-creative processes that you have done, and imagine there are listeners who are also facilitators or they set up processes on a global or planetary scale. What do you think is lacking in these processes, just from a very personal perception? And what can the people learn to like templatize or enrich their toolkit so that the learnings we have on a, let's say, micro, one building, one school, meso, city level, macro, let's say, nation state level, to infuse democracy itself, to innovate on democracy, as exemplified with your process that you're kicking off with the Citizens Assembly in Germany. Yeah, where do you think the whole field of co-creation, facilitation with these like, yeah, ultra large scale challenges is standing? And what are some of the pointers that you're putting out there why maybe many of these initiatives, you know, that are out there since now plus 50 years, you know, the report of the Club of Rome was issued 1972. I was not alive. Even you were not alive. You're just like, whatever, 2-3 years older than me. So what do you think people can learn and maybe templatize, and how can they enrich their toolkit for these like planetary and global processes?
Yeah. First of all, I think we have to understand that the planetary global process is not one process, but a multitude of processes, which all pay into the same kind of direction or new paradigm. But we are already doing it. Many other people are doing it. We're all experimenting with new forms of how to create, how to find solutions, how to understand processes. It's happening everywhere, and it's gaining momentum. And I think it's a little bit like it's something like a positive tipping point. And I hope I will, in my lifespan, experience this positive tipping point. And it is already happening, not just in Germany, but everywhere. It's my feeling. We're not yet there. But for example, when I started 10 years ago with this kind of work, I really had difficulties explaining people in administration what I'm trying to do and why it is important to do this kind of work. Now I get an official bid by, for example, the Ministry of Economics in Germany, where in the bid they ask for a co-creative process. Like, this is amazing because maybe even they have just heard about it, or I'm not quite sure what will happen if they really start it. They're asking for it. They're actually, a federal ministry in Germany is actually saying in their own bid, is saying, we need a process. We have to co-create with the people we're working with, because this seems to be the best solution for us to find solutions to our subject issues. And this is amazing. And I see that in many other parts of the world as well, that this is happening. So that's a positive tipping point. And in terms of what can we do is, or what is this, a very sort of on all levels, something I would recommend to start with or get into it. I feel that this notion of don't try to streamline, don't try to control the process. Give the opportunity for a multitude of approaches. That is one of the main fundamental principles for me of co-creation. And it's very simple. If you're in a workshop, a small workshop with 20 people, and you want to start co-creating on something, doesn't matter what, don't tell them what to do. Don't tell them, now we're doing this brainstorm and now we're doing, I don't know, a design thinking process in 5 steps. Instead, ask them, what do you need at the moment that you feel you get into the question or into finding solutions for our problem, or what do you feel is necessary for you at the moment? Then write that down, what everyone feels in the room, and then you have a whole sort of board of what people want to do. This is about process, not about solution or about product. It's about process. Like, you have many suggestions of processes you can now start to move into co-creation. And then you let people choose what process, what method they want to do. And it doesn't have to be the one they were telling, because maybe someone else mentioned something which made much more sense. And then you let them do it alone, in groups of 2, everyone together, like how it is happening. And when these people come together, having done what they felt was most necessary to do at this moment in time, you'll be astonished how much synchronicity there is in their approaches, solutions, and idea they come back with. And I think this can also be applied on a global level. Like, let's talk about climate change. I'm not sure that the right approach is to make one solution how to tackle climate change for everyone. Please let every country ask them the question, what do you need to do at this moment, to do the best thing you can do in this time now for climate change? Let them do it, come back and share. I think that would be the much better approach.
I think my biggest aha moment, it's always interesting when I have this like aha moment myself being in this virtual room together. So I think the pivotal moment I just had is talking. So deliberation, people are talking together, is just one method in a process. So it's kind of almost odd that when you look at the biggest companies on the planet and like the rich toolkits and the how many facilitators and change management experts they're paying to try to come up with innovation for products and whatever ESG measures to be taken. And then we look at the political spectrum that's like kind of 2 centuries back, and people are literally still sitting in a room talking and then negotiating what could be the best solution. It's never like a workshop session. It doesn't really get creative. People are not using like all their senses. They're not getting creative. So maybe one of the main takeaways for me is that when I try to templatize not only your learnings, that of Jascha Rohr, but of other people in the field, is then to enrich and open up for a plurality of accesses to build process designs that go beyond just talking, really pretty odd, like how can you spur the creativity of hundreds, maybe thousands of people in a process? I wonder if that's a good segue to, because we were sharing the show notes, and I wrote, what role does tech play in the area? So through a full stack lens, what are the layers and applications do we need? What's a suite? What's a dashboard? And what is existing out there? What's lacking out there? And you were just writing like one bullet, and it says Gaia the cyborg. So I've never heard Gaia the cyborg. So I'm curious, to at least sketch where you think the technical support is standing and what do you think is needed. And what do you mean with Gaia the cyborg?
Yeah, Gaia the cyborg is just a term I'm in love with. It just came to me one day Well, I was actually talking exactly about this question. And, you know, we imagine Gaia as, especially in sort of some, in hippie and esoteric circles, Gaia is this goddess or some organic entity full of life. And Gaia is not actually. I'm very much a fan of Donna Haraway, and she talks about cyborgs a lot. And cyborgs are just entities which consist of sort of old understanding, old paradigm nature, old understanding paradigm society, and old understanding paradigm technology. And they're just these hybrid forms which include everyone. And I mean, look at Gaia. It already is a cyborg. It is an ecosystem, but it's also, it has a layer, like Daniel, a friend of ours, acquaintance of ours, calls it the not the Anthropocene, but the anthroposphere. So there's an ecosphere around Gaia, there's an anthroposphere, and there's also a technosphere, and it's all part of Gaia. It's not separate. It is one big being, and technology is already part of it, and it becomes increasingly fast with AI and so forth, more and more of it. And the only, I think, sensible approach is to approach it exactly as everything else. It is a non-human entity, a participator, and it has to be included in the process. Technology is part of the process. We can't go back. There is no back anyways. It's a stupid concept. It's there. It's here. We're talking through it. I mean, yeah, it's participators, and we have to find ways of including technology into co-creative processes. And of course, it raises a lot of questions because there's a lot of danger. But so are people. You know, we talked about it. There are toxic people. We have to include them in our processes. So there's dangerous technology, yes, but that doesn't mean that we just can discard technology altogether. Or so, yeah, it's just part of it. Deal with it. And I just love thinking about Gaia as a cyborg. I think it's a great. And then reframe the idea of a cyborg not as the Terminator cyborg, but as a being which is a generative being of all these elements, social, natural, technological elements being included, and hopefully in a beneficial and regenerative way.
So I love the philosophical answer. You know, in a way, Gaia the cyborg itself is talking to itself, whilst Alistair, sitting in Guatemala in the high mountains, looking over Antigua, with Jascha, who makes the human experience, sitting in Vienna. And nevertheless wonder, at least, is there a short pointer where you see the suite of technological solutions as you know them exist, supporting co-creative processes, like out there now? And what do you think is needed, especially to support co-creative processes on a planetary scale?
Actually, I have no idea, because this is so new and this is so changing so fast. We just had in our team with the Institute for Participatory Design this lunch discussion, like, will AI replace us as process facilitators? And everyone was going like, it will never be the case, and AI doesn't have empathy and so forth. And I'm not convinced, actually. I think that maybe there are some, you know, congenial process facilitators which will not be able to be replaced by AI, but maybe 95% of facilitators will be. I don't know. I really, yeah, I'm just looking at the whole, how it unfolds with awe, and also a lot of questions, and I have no answers to it yet.
Yeah, thanks for being that honest. Last two questions. When you look at the future of co-creation, because you yourself being immersed in the field in the DACH region, so DACH stands for Germany, Austria, Switzerland, basically the German-speaking countries, but also being a very international creature and having a lot of international ties, where do you see the future of co-creation going? I don't mind how long you sketch the timeline as we look now into a crystal ball and we don't know it obviously, but just as a human being that's deeply immersed in the field on a day-to-day, yeah, where do you see the field moving?
I'm actually convinced, like, if we're gonna make it on this planet, it'll be the main mode of action for us as societies in the next decades. And that is just due to what we call, what we're talking about with the field process model. I believe we've come through the great acceleration. That is the phase of the roots of the tree. Like we've grown everything so fast and pulled it together, and now we're in this mess. Now we're in the great transformation. Like we are in the mode of crisis, and we have to make a decision as a global civilization. And I hope, and I also believe, like, if we do the decisions we're facing right now, if we really face them and make these decisions and go into the transformation, then what will happen is what I call the great co-creation. And that's also the title of my book, because I think then we come into the area of new possibilities, the branches, the fruits, the new abundance, the new ideas, where technology, nature, society works in these multiplicity, multimodal process of co-creation together to create the world we really want to see being established in this world. And that would be my vision and my hope. We can fail, I'm sure, but as I said, when I look around, so much is happening. Co-creations everywhere. Like all these small co-creations are happening everywhere, these processes. It will get to a tipping point where hopefully it will be the main mode of politics. For example, I can see that we're not trapped anymore in antagonistic discussions in parliaments, but we're actually coming together in third chamber institutions to co-create solutions for our society. I can see that happening, and I hope it will happen.
Then the last question would be, out of this very generic encounter in between two old friends, for such an important topic to move beyond antagonistic type discussions, as we see the political divides deepening and a broad array of people who listen into that podcast, what are some pointers and practical tips that you would give people that want to enrich their own process design? Maybe they want to engage with you. Maybe they want to educate themselves on co-creation. What are a couple of pointers and just really practical tips at the end?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope if people would read my book, and it's getting translated into English. I hope next year we'll have the English version. And the book is the attempt to find it is a workshop itself. It is a process. You can read it as a process and work with it. At least that would be my hope. There's also the Co-Creators University, where we offer courses. Also, next year they will start in English. And but this is sort of pointing towards working with me and in my approach. But as I said, there are so many things, and the most important thing is start thinking about processes of creation with all which is involved. Engage yourself into these processes, make these experiences, and if you come to a threshold before crisis, step over it.
Sounds good to me. As a last word, thanks for the conversation, Jascha. It was a great pleasure meeting you.
Ali, it was lovely. Thank you so much for inviting me.